Hey guys, it's Jasma, and today, in spirit of Christmas, which is coming up very soon, we're going to make some reindeer macarons. So I haven't made macarons in quite a while, but these are such cute treats for the holiday time. So these are chocolate macarons filled with chocolate ganache, and then we're going to decorate it with some more chocolate to make it look like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I've made a bunch of macaron videos in the past, whether it's simple flavors or also for the holiday season. I've made some Snowman Macarons, which is also perfect for the winter time. So if you want to check those out, I will leave all the links in the description box down below. So first I'm going to make the chocolate ganache as the filling. I like to make this ahead of time because it takes a little bit of time to chill in the fridge. So I like to do this before I make the macaron shells, this way they're nice and ready to go once the shells are baked. To make chocolate ganache, you only need two simple ingredients. So here I have some semi-sweet chocolate chips and heavy cream. I'm using semi-sweet chocolate chips because they aren't as sweet as milk chocolate and other types of chocolate. It is slightly bitter, so it perfectly balances out the macaron shells, which are really sweet as well. So I'm going to pour the chocolate into a bowl. And then straight over that, we're going to pour in the cream. And I'll place this into the microwave for around 45 seconds until it is nice and melted. Take the chocolate out of the microwave and just let it sit on the countertop. Don't stir it, don't do anything to it, for around a minute. This is going to allow the heat of the cream to melt the chocolate entirely and make it a lot easier for you to stir and make it smooth later on. Stir the chocolate. I like to use a whisk, it makes it a lot faster, and just keep stirring until the chocolate completely combines with the cream. It can take a little bit of time. At first it may look like it's not going to come together, but just keep stirring and you'll end up with a smooth and shiny chocolate ganache. Make sure that all the cream and bits of chocolate is stirred in. And then cover this with a piece of plastic wrap, place it into the fridge to chill, and then we can move on to making the macarons. Now we can make the macaron shells. So since this is a chocolate macaron, make sure that you're using good quality cocoa powder. Make sure that it is nice and dark and good quality, this way it gives it a better flavor and a deeper color as well. To make macarons, you're going to need ground almonds, also known as almond meal or almond flour. And it is important that you sift everything when you're making macarons to make sure that the shell comes out nice and smooth and it's not lumpy. So I'm going to pass this through a sieve. Also add in the icing sugar, and finally the cocoa powder. While the dry ingredients are sifted, I'm just going to give it a quick stir so the ingredients are mixed together. Now on to the meringue. So this is the part where we separate the eggs and then whip it up so that we can fold it into the dry ingredients and form the macaron batter. Today I'm going to be using my stand mixer, but of course you can be using a hand mixer as well to whip up the egg whites. I'm going to place this onto an electrical scale so that we can measure out the amount of egg whites that we're going to use. Make sure that you're being very precise when you're measuring out egg whites, because if you add too much or too little, it can mess with the consistency of the batter. When you're separating the egg whites, also make sure that no liquid or grease comes in contact with the egg whites because it can prevent it from whipping up. So measure out 50 grams, and also don't get any yolks into the egg whites. It usually takes about 1.5 large eggs to reach 50 grams of egg whites. So now I'm going to whip this until it becomes frothy. Once it reaches this stage, it becomes frothier, there are more bubbles, and it's becoming whiter in color, adding your first stage of sugar. When I make meringue, I like to add my sugar in 3 different stages. This allows the sugar to dissolve into the meringue much faster and prevent the egg whites from overbeating. Then continue beating until it becomes slightly stiffer. As it becomes whiter in color, and you can start seeing the tracks of the beater and the egg whites, add in your next stage of sugar. Then beat until soft peaks form. Scrape the sides every once in a while to make sure all the sugar is combined. And finally, add in your last bit of sugar. Then beat until stiff peaks form. You can see the meringue has hold a stiff peak. It can go straight up, and if you shake it, it doesn't move. So that means the egg whites are ready. Clean off the beater, and now we can move over to combining this with the dry ingredients. Add the meringue to the dry ingredients. So now this is where we're going to begin folding the dry ingredients into the meringue. You want to be quite careful here because you don't want to overfold to the point where the batter becomes way too runny. If this is your first time making macarons, go check out my basic macaron video where I go into much more depth on how to make macarons, the process it takes to make sure that it comes out right every single time. So at first, I like to just fold. It doesn't really matter if you're too careful at this point because you're just trying to combine dry ingredients into the meringue. It is essential that you're using a spatula to do this process. So just keep folding, and you can see that there are no more dry bits of almond meal and icing sugar left in this mixture, so I'm going to start folding it. So I like to go around the bowl and then through the center, pressing it down. This is going to release any extra air that is not needed in the macaron batter, but still keeping it nice and airy. Once you reach this stage and basically everything is combined, they're all one color and the batter is becoming runnier, continuously test it. So just let the batter drip off of your spatula. So you can see this is still quite thick and needs more folding. The consistency that we're looking for is when it starts to form a ribbon as it falls off your spatula. You can see this is runny enough to fold ribbons as you let it drip off of the spatula. It is important that you do not overmix after this stage because then the batter will become way too runny and it won't hold its shape when you pipe it out into macarons. So I'm going to load this into a piping bag now so we can pipe it out into little macarons. Here I have a piping bag fitted with a small round tip. I always use this tip when it comes to making macarons because it's a good size so that you have a lot of control into the shape and size that you pipe your macarons into. I'm using a disposable piping bag. You can use a Ziploc bag if you don't have one of these. And I'm just going to twist it, lift up the tip, and then stand it up in a cup. This is going to make it easier to fill the bag, but also make sure it doesn't come out the bottom since you've twisted it so that the batter stays inside of the bag. Prepare a baking tray lined with some parchment paper. I'm using a sheet of reusable parchment paper here, but you can use regular parchment paper or also a silicone mat. A silicone mat allows you to have a much smoother surface since it also doesn't wrinkle when you pipe the batter on there. So I'm going to close up my bag. And we could pipe it onto the baking tray. Since I'm making reindeer macarons today, I'm just going to pipe little round circles. You can make them as big or as little as you like. I piped out the macarons, so now I'm going to bang this on the counter a couple of times to release any extra air bubbles. This step also helps smooth out the surface of the macarons. Now our last and final step before we allow these macarons to dry is I'm going to take a toothpick and smooth out the surface. So when you bang them on the counter, the air bubbles release and they create a little indent inside of the macaron shells. Now I like to smooth it out with a toothpick so that it is no longer there after the macarons are dried. Make sure you're doing this while the batter is still nice and wet so you don't make the surface really rough because it'll stay there once it bakes. Alright, once that's done, I'm going to set this aside and allow it to dry. This is going to allow the surface to form a skin, which is going to trap the moisture inside of the macarons, so later on when it bakes, it forms the little feet of the macaron shells. It usually takes me quite a short period of time. I found that this batter dries quite quickly, especially during the winter time. It only takes up to 10 to 15 minutes. But it can vary for you depending on the humidity of your room, so it can take up to half an hour to almost an hour for it to dry. So be patient with it because it is crucial that you allow the surface to form a skin before you put it into the oven or it would just look like a regular cookie. To know if it is done, just touch it with your finger, and if the surface is dried and nothing sticks, you can put it into the oven. So meanwhile, I'm going to preheat my oven to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. to making the chocolate decorations. So I'm going to be making some reindeer antlers for these macarons with some chocolate melts. I have some dark chocolate melts here, and I'm just going to melt it in the microwave in 20-second intervals, stirring in between each one. This is after 40 seconds. Make sure you're stirring it constantly so that it doesn't burn. Since the microwave heats unevenly, you want to stir it so that they all melt. And this also prevents the chocolate from burning. Make sure when you're making chocolate decorations that you're using candy melts and not chocolate chips. Chocolate chips are meant to hold their shape when it's baking in the oven, so it's more suitable for making cookies since it won't melt down. So if you're using chocolate chips in this situation, it actually would be a lot thicker and a lot harder compared to chocolate candy melts. As you can see here, it's really smooth and really runny, and it melted down after only a minute. So make sure you're using candy melts when you're making chocolate decorations. Now I'm going to load this into a piping bag. You can also use a Ziploc bag if you don't have a lot or you don't have a piping bag. I think a piping bag just gives you a lot more control when you're piping. The ganache is chilled in the fridge for 1.5 hours. It is nice and firm now, but it is still workable. To make sure that the ganache does not separate once it's whipped and come out lumpy, don't over-refrigerate the ganache. If the chocolate is fully set, it will separate from the cream when you whip it. Now, using my paddle attachment, I'm going to whip this until it becomes light and fluffy. This makes it easier to pipe, it tastes better, and also it stays nice and soft in the refrigerator after the macarons are assembled. You want to whip it up to stage like this, where it's light, pale, and also very soft. But try not to overmix it because there's a chance that the chocolate might separate from the cream. I'm going to load my whipped chocolate ganache into a piping bag so we can fill the macarons. You can also use a Ziploc bag if you like. This isn't a lot of filling because I usually don't put too much between my macarons. I don't like there to be too much chocolate because it makes it really sweet, so you can double the recipe if you like more filling in your macarons. Before we fill the macarons, I'm going to match up the shells to around the same size. And then just lay them out. This is going to make it a lot easier when you're filling the macarons. Alright, all of the macarons are filled, so now we can place the antlers inside of the filling. Carefully peel the antlers, which should now be set, off of the silicone mat, and then into a macaron, and carefully put the antlers in between the two shells and stick it into the filling. Squeeze the shells down just slightly to make sure it's in place. Now we can finally decorate this and make it look like reindeers. So I'm going to make a few with the red noses, and then the rest I'll decorate with the melted chocolate. I would usually use chocolate for this decoration as well, but since you only need such tiny amounts of this red icing, I'm going to be making it out of icing sugar and water. Add 1.5 tablespoons of icing sugar to a bowl. And then to that, a 1/4 teaspoon of water. And mix until smooth. You do not need a lot of liquid for this recipe, so be sure not to add too much. You want a nice and thick icing so that it actually holds its shape when you pipe it. If you added too much water, just add a little more icing sugar until you reach the right consistency. That is the consistency you want. Really thick, but still pipeable. Once that's mixed, I'm going to add in some red gel food coloring. If you're using liquid food coloring, then you might need less water. I'm going for a really nice and condensed red color, so I'm going to add quite a bit of this. Here's my red icing. I added the tiniest bit of cocoa powder to deepen the color, but it is entirely up to you what you prefer. Now using a chopstick, I'm going to draw on the nose of the reindeer. You can choose to pipe it as well, but once again, since it's such a small amount, I'm just going to do this straight away. I have the noses done, so now I'm going to decorate the rest of the reindeers with some leftover chocolate that we used to make the antlers. Again, I'm using a toothpick since it's a very small amount, but you can choose to pipe it with a bag if you like. So that's it with this Reindeer Macarons. Really fun treat to share with your friends and family this Christmas. It's also really nice to get kids involved when it comes to the decorating. I will leave all the links to my other macaron videos in the description down below. Be sure to go check out my basic macarons video if you've never made macarons before. I go into much more depth about the science behind it and gives you lots of tips and tricks to make sure they come out perfect every single time. I've also made Panda Macarons, Snowman Macarons, and will soon be coming out with some Heart Macarons for Valentine's Day, so stay tuned for that. I really hope you could try these out. Merry Christmas, and see you guys next time. Bye!